Have you ever wondered what happens when a millionaire's world turns upside down? Andrew Sllayton opened the door expecting dinner, but what he found were two 6-year-old boys in red delivery caps and a truth that would append everything he thought he knew about his life. Andrew Sllayton was not a man easily surprised. As the CEO of one of the country's most powerful tech corporations, he had long ago trained himself to predict every variable, to control outcomes before they unfolded, to stay 10 steps ahead of anything or anyone who dared challenge his plans. That evening was supposed to be no different. It was late. The sky outside his office stretched in thick velvet gray, and the lights of downtown shimmered far below the 30th floor. He loosened his gray tie with one hand while scrolling through emails with the other, the silence around him broken only by the low hum of the HVAC system. It had been another long day full of meetings that led nowhere, investors demanding more, and analysts offering less. He hadn't eaten since early morning, so out of routine and convenience, he ordered dinner from a local delivery app he liked for its speed and reliability. When the doorbell rang, he didn't even look up from his screen at first. The knock came again, sharper this time, and he stood straightening his sleeves as he walked to the door of his corner office. He was already reaching into his wallet, ready to hand a tip without much eye contact or small talk. But when he opened the door, everything in him froze. Standing before him were two small boys, no older than 6, each wearing a red cap and oversized delivery backpack that almost swallowed their frames. Their cheeks were slightly flushed from the wind, and their thin arms clutched the insulated bag between them like it was the most important object in the world. One of them grinned wide and said brightly, "Your order, sir." The other stayed quiet, his eyes scanning Andrew's face with a calmness that didn't belong to a child that young. Andrew's breath caught in his throat. He stared at them, stunned, unable to speak for a moment. The fluorescent lighting from the hallway cast a soft halo around their heads, and for a second it didn't feel real. He crouched slowly, lowering himself to their eye level, and said carefully, "You're not delivery boys, you're children." His voice was quieter than usual, unsure. The grinning boy's smile faltered just a bit. The second boy, the serious one, straightened and replied softly, "We're helping our mom. She's sick." Andrew didn't move. His fingers were still curled loosely around his wallet now forgotten in his hand. He looked from one boy to the other, noting the two thin coats, the flushed noses, the hint of exhaustion behind their eyes. He saw something else, too, something he remembered from long ago, but rarely let himself feel anymore. It was the look of someone doing more than they should, because no one else would do it for them. "Where's your mom now?" he asked, his voice steadier. "She's at home," the serious one said. "She works, but she gets tired a lot." "Do you do this often?" They hesitated. The grinning one nodded slightly, though now his expression was more guarded. Andrew stood up slowly. He had a dozen more questions, but he knew this wasn't the place to ask them. The boys were shivering slightly, and their small hands were red from the cold. He took the food from them, gently, reached into his wallet, and handed them a few crisp bills, more than a generous tip, but not so much that it might scare them. "Do you need help getting home?" he asked. The serious boy shook his head. "We know the way." And just like that, they turned and walked back down the hallway, backpacks bouncing slightly with each step. He watched them disappear into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft click that sounded far too final. For several minutes, Andrew didn't move. He stood there with a bag of food in his hand and a tightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He tried to go back to his desk to answer the rest of the emails, but the screen blurred, the lines of text dissolving into white. He tried to eat, but the food tasted wrong now. Too heavy, too meaningless. He walked to the window instead and stared down at the city, wondering how many other children were out there doing what they shouldn't have to simply because no one else could. By the time he picked up his phone again, his decision was already made. He wasn't going to let this go. He called the delivery company and demanded to speak to someone in charge. When he met resistance, he pushed harder, dropping his name, his position, the weight of his influence like a hammer. Within 20 minutes, he had an address. He didn't even change clothes. He grabbed his coat, locked up the office, and headed out into the cold. His mind racing, unaware that his entire life had just pivoted at the sound of a child's voice saying, "We're helping our mom." The apartment building stood at the edge of a worn-out block where the city's wealth hadn't bothered to stretch its hand. The bricks were faded, the windows fogged from age and moisture, and the buzzer panel beside the entrance had half its buttons missing. Andrew stood outside the door, blinking against the cold, the paper in his hand with the boy's delivery address already beginning to curl at the edges from the wind. He was used to penthouses, security gates, private elevators. He was not used to this. Not anymore. Still, he pressed the button with the right number and waited. No response. He pressed again. A few seconds later, a static-filled buzz sounded and the door unlocked with a tired groan. Inside, the stairwell smelled of old paint and boiled cabbage. There was no elevator, so he climbed the stairs. 3 flights. His breath sharp in his chest more from adrenaline than exertion. He didn't know what he would say when the door opened. He only knew that something about those boys had lodged itself under his skin like a splinter. The door to apartment 3C was cracked and swollen from years of weather. Its number faded and taped in place. He knocked gently, then again with more purpose. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sound of slow, dragging footsteps approached from within. The door creaked open. A woman stood there leaning slightly against the frame, wrapped in an oversized sweater and a look of cautious confusion. Her skin was pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her features were undeniably familiar, especially around the eyes. She blinked at him, surprised, guarded. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Andrew took a breath. "I believe your sons delivered food to my office tonight. I wanted to speak with you if you're Marie Brooks." Her posture shifted subtly. She didn't open the door any wider, but she didn't shut it either. "I am," she said. "Did something happen?" "No," he replied quickly, sensing her alarm. They were polite. They were children. That's why I'm here. Marie looked away for a second, her hand tightening on the edge of the door. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Andrew said. "I just need to understand why 2 6-year-olds are delivering food at night in winter alone." Marie opened the door a little more and stepped aside. "You'd better come in, but I don't want your pity." The apartment was small and dim, the kind of place that looked lived in and worn down by life. 2 small beds were tucked into the corner of the main room, books and coloring pages scattered across the floor, a space heater buzzing faintly in the background. The kitchen was no bigger than a closet. A blanket hung across a broken window to keep out the cold. Despite everything, it was clean, carefully maintained. Survival lived here, but so did love. Marie gestured toward a chair. Andrew sat. She lowered herself onto the opposite couch with the stiffness of someone whose body hurt more than she let on. "I didn't ask them to do it," she said after a pause. "Not at first. I've been sick for months. Kidney failure. I do what I can from home. Typing jobs, freelance stuff, but it's not enough. My sister was supposed to help, but she's gone now. The boys, they saw me struggling. One day, they took the delivery bag and just went. I was furious, but they came back with enough tips to pay for dinner. And the next day, they went again." Andrew listened, not interrupting. Every word hit harder than he expected. "I told them to stop," she continued, "but they kept sneaking out, said they wanted to help. And I didn't have the strength to chase them down every time. Some nights they don't even make more than $5, but they think they're saving me. They want to be men." Her voice cracked slightly at that last word. She rubbed her hand across her forehead and took a shaky breath. "I'm not a bad mother," she added quickly, almost defensively. "I'm just tired and alone, and I didn't know anyone noticed until you showed up." Andrew sat still for a moment, absorbing it all. The CEO in him, the part that solved problems with money and power, was already calculating how he could step in, fix it, make it go away. But another part of him, the quieter part that had been numb for too long, understood that this wasn't about charity. This was about dignity, about human fragility, about a woman doing everything she could, and 2 little boys who were willing to risk cold nights and dangerous streets just to keep the lights on. I didn't come to judge you, he said finally. And I'm not here to offer something that makes you feel small, but I do want to help. I can do something. Anything. Marie looked at him for a long time. Why you? She asked softly. People see us every day. Nobody knocks. Why did you? Andrew didn't have a perfect answer. But he said the truth. Because when they looked at me, I saw something I haven't seen in years. I saw myself. Marie didn't speak for a while. Then she nodded slowly like she was giving herself permission to believe he meant it. You can stay for dinner, she said. We don't have much, but the boys will be back soon and they'll want to meet you properly. And as strange as it felt, Andrew stayed. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, sitting in a small apartment with peeling walls and hope flickering faintly like a candle in the cold, was the beginning of a new life he never planned and would never want to leave behind. The boys returned just after 6, their small faces red from the wind, jackets slightly unzipped, and backpacks slung over their shoulders like they were returning from a battlefield instead of a delivery route. As soon as they stepped inside, their eyes locked onto Andrew sitting at the kitchen table. Lucas, the more expressive of the two, stopped in his tracks and whispered, "That's the man from earlier." Jamie, more cautious, glanced at their mother for reassurance. Marie simply gave a small nod and motioned them inside. Andrew stood up, unsure if he should say something first. But before he could speak, Lucas stepped forward. Did we do something wrong? The question hit harder than expected. Andrew crouched down and shook his head. No, not at all. You were brave and kind. But your children shouldn't have to be brave like that. Marie told the boys to wash their hands and change out of their work clothes while she reheated a small pot of soup. The kitchen smelled of lentils and herbs, and though it was a simple meal, there was something grounding in it, something honest. Andrew had eaten in 5-star restaurants all over the world. But as he sat back down and watched Marie stir the pot with tired but practiced hands, he realized this was the first meal in years that actually mattered to him. The four of them sat around the small table, elbows tucked in due to space, and shared the food in near silence. Occasionally, Lucas would throw in a question about Andrew's job. What did a CEO actually do? And did he get to press buttons all day? Jamie was quieter, but he watched Andrew closely, his gaze filled with something Andrew couldn't quite name. Maybe hope, maybe caution. After dinner, the boys went to the other side of the room to draw with their colored pencils, leaving Marie and Andrew alone again. She wrapped her hands around a chipped mug inside. I don't want you to feel sorry for us, she said, not looking up. We're not a project and I'm not waiting for someone to fix our lives. Andrew nodded. I don't feel sorry, but I do feel responsible. Maybe not for what happened to you, but for the fact that I can walk away and most people will. I don't want to. Marie glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. So, what do you want? It was a fair question, and one he hadn't fully answered even in his own mind. But he knew it wasn't about guilt. It wasn't even just about the kids. It was about that moment at the office door when something cracked in him that he hadn't realized was still fragile. He'd built a life on walls of glass, money, status, power, but 2 little boys had broken through it with nothing more than tired feet and red hats. I want to help without taking something from you, he said. Not your pride, not your independence, not your place as their mother. Just help, whatever that looks like. Marie studied him for a long time. Then she did something unexpected. She nodded once and said, Okay, but you don't get to swoop in and be the hero. Andrew smiled softly. I don't want to be the hero. I just want to be useful. Over the next few days, he returned. At first, it was just with groceries and warm meals from real restaurants. Then it was new jackets for the boys and some fresh blankets for the beds. He never stayed too long, never made her feel like she owed him anything, and he never showed up uninvited. Slowly, the visits became routine. The boys started to wait for him. Lucas would ask if Mr. Sllayton was coming again, and Jamie, though quieter, began slipping his drawings into Andrew's briefcase when he thought no one was looking. Andrew kept every single one. One afternoon, he asked Marie if she had ever considered stopping work completely just to rest and focus on recovery. She laughed dryly. "Rest doesn't pay for medicine," she said. But he saw how pale she looked, how the fatigue in her eyes had deepened. That night, back in his penthouse, he sat in the dark with a glass of water untouched in his hand. The world of contracts and quarterly goals felt far away. What mattered now was something more human, something real. He didn't need a reason anymore. He just needed to act. The next morning, he called a private physician and arranged for a full consultation at Marie's home. He also called his lawyer and had them create a quiet, legitimate job listing, something Marie could accept with dignity. A role in the foundation's outreach team, flexible hours, remote work, real pay, no charity. He delivered the offer in an envelope later that week. Marie opened it with trembling hands and read the letter in silence. Then she looked up at him with tears she didn't bother to hide. "You made it sound like I earned it." "You did," Andrew said simply. "You've earned 1,000 good things." She nodded again. And for the first time since they met, she looked at him not with caution or disbelief, but with trust. And that, more than any deal Andrew had ever closed, felt like the beginning of something that truly mattered. The days began to unfold with a strange kind of rhythm, quiet, but filled with purpose. Andrew found himself waking earlier, not to check the stock market or prep for meetings, but because something in his chest pulled him toward that modest apartment in a forgotten corner of the city. Marie's condition, though stable for now, required more than just medication. It demanded rest, nutrition, emotional safety. She hadn't had those things in years, and it showed in the way she moved, slow and deliberate, in the way her voice sometimes faltered when she stood too long. The private doctor Andrew arranged for made weekly visits and confirmed what Andrew had suspected but didn't want to hear. Without a transplant, her condition would continue to worsen. The medication could only hold off so much. Andrew didn't tell her immediately. He knew she suspected it herself, but saying the words aloud would force her to accept something she wasn't ready to face. Instead, he focused on the things he could control. He quietly covered the cost of her treatments, set up automatic deliveries of fresh food to the apartment, and made sure the boys had everything they needed: books, clothes, art supplies. Every time he visited, there was something new in their small home. A second-hand table that he personally refinished, a working heater, a lamp for Jamie's side of the bed because he was afraid of the dark. He didn't ask permission for most of it. He just paid attention, noticed what was missing, and filled in the gaps without ceremony. Marie never asked how he managed it all. She wasn't naive. She knew money was involved, but she also knew this wasn't just about wealth. Andrew didn't move like someone doing charity. He moved like someone trying to fix something inside himself by fixing the world around him. And she understood that more deeply than she ever let on. One evening, after the boys had fallen asleep, Marie and Andrew sat together in the kitchen. The air was thick with quiet, the kind that settles when two people don't need to fill the space with words. She stirred a cup of tea while Andrew leaned back in his chair, tired, but somehow content. "You don't owe us anything," she said softly, not looking at him. "I know," he replied just as softly. "Then why do you keep showing up?" He thought about that for a long time. The question wasn't accusing. It was honest, vulnerable. She wanted to understand. "I guess," he said finally, "because no one showed up for me." Marie turned her head slightly, waiting. "I lost my wife and daughter 5 years ago," he said. "Car accident. Wrong time, wrong place. After that, I didn't know how to be around people anymore. I buried myself in work. Built walls, told myself that was strength. But when I opened that office door and saw your boys, it was like something cracked. Like they reminded me that life still knocks softly sometimes, but it knocks and you don't always get a second chance to answer." Marie didn't say anything right away. Her fingers tightened slightly around her mug. Then she nodded, her expression unreadable but not cold. "I think they saved you," she said. "I think so, too." The next day, Andrew surprised the boys with a visit to the city aquarium. It was the first time he'd taken time off from work in over 2 years, and it was the first time the boys had ever been inside a building so large, so full of color and motion and wonder. Lucas clung to the glass wall where the jellyfish floated, whispering that they looked like ghosts that smile. Jamie asked questions non-stop. How long could sharks sleep? How did octopuses squeeze through holes? Were penguins scared of the dark like him? Andrew answered what he could, laughed more than he expected, and somewhere between the sea turtle tank and the dolphin show, forgot he was supposed to be someone important. They ended the day with ice cream from a street vendor. Marie hadn't come. She said she needed rest, but the boys insisted on bringing her something sweet. On the way back, as they walked through a quiet street scattered with cherry blossoms, Jamie suddenly took Andrew's hand. "Do you like being with us?" he asked without looking up. Andrew felt something tighten in his chest. He squeezed the small hand gently. "Yes," he said. "I like it very much." The boy nodded. "We like it, too. We talk about you when you're not here." "Yeah," Andrew smiled. "What do you say?" Lucas, walking ahead of them, turned around and grinned. "We say you're not like the other grown-ups." Andrew chuckled. "Is that a good thing?" "Yeah," Jamie said. "You listen." That night, Andrew sat in his penthouse, staring out at the skyline. It was beautiful as always. Silver buildings glowing against the black velvet of the city. But it didn't feel like his life anymore. Not really. His life was in that apartment now, in the laughter of two boys and the quiet strength of their mother. It was in drawings taped to walls and tiny shoes at the door. He realized he didn't want to go back to who he had been before. That version of him had been rich and powerful and completely alone. He picked up his phone and opened a note he'd been avoiding. It was titled Next Step. It had been empty for weeks. Now he began to type. He wasn't sure what the end of this story would be, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He wasn't walking away. Not this time. A quiet transformation had taken place in Andrew's life. So subtle at first, he hadn't noticed it until it was already woven into his days. His mornings no longer started with the sound of market alerts or urgent calls from Europe. They began instead with an unhurried breakfast stop at Marie's apartment, where the boys would greet him with sleepy smiles and half-finished drawings. His calendar still brimmed with meetings, but more and more of them were shifted, rescheduled, or handed off so he could be present for things like school drop-offs, doctor's appointments, and library visits. There were no official announcements, no dramatic changes in public image, just a quiet, steady reordering of priorities. But peace, especially the kind earned after pain, has a way of drawing attention, and not always the welcome kind. The first signs came in the form of whispers among his executive team. Questions about why the CEO had been absent from several investor meetings or why the quarterly report was delayed because of his travel to an unnamed residential address. Then came the speculation. A board member hinted at inappropriate relationships. A columnist from a high-profile business journal picked up the thread and posted a vague accusatory article about Andrew's recent personal entanglements. The article didn't name Marie or the boys, but it didn't have to. The damage was in the implication that Andrew Sllayton, known for his precision and professionalism, had become emotionally compromised. When the article hit, Andrew was in the kitchen at Marie's, helping Jamie mix pancake batter while Lucas set the table. Marie was folding laundry on the couch, a rare smile on her face as she listened to the boys argue about whether pancakes were better with chocolate chips or blueberries. Andrew's phone buzzed twice and he glanced at the screen. He froze. The headline read, "From corner office to family drama. Is Sllayton crossing the line?" He didn't say anything right away. He turned the phone face down and continued stirring the batter. But the warmth of the morning had cooled. After breakfast, when the boys had gone to the other room, Marie noticed the change in his face. "What happened?" she asked, folding the last shirt with deliberate care. He hesitated for a beat before answering. "An article about me? About us?" Her hands stilled. "Is it bad?" "It's not kind," he said. "And it's not entirely false." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Do you regret this?" He shook his head instantly. Not for a second. But it complicates things. The board's watching me. Shareholders, too. They don't like it when I do things they can't understand. Marie nodded slowly, then exhaled. So what happens now? Andrew sat beside her, hands clasped. Now I make a choice. I can either step back to protect my image and reassure my investors, or I can step forward and tell the truth. And the truth is that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The following day, Andrew walked into the company's main conference room where the quarterly shareholder meeting was already in motion. Journalists were present, cameras lined the back of the room, and several board members exchanged pointed looks as he entered. He wore a dark suit, crisp and flawless. But there was something different in his posture. It wasn't the practiced confidence of a corporate leader. It was steadier, quieter, and unmistakably sincere. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't launch into metrics or projections. He put his notes aside and looked directly at the crowd. You've read things, he began. Some of them are true. Some aren't. But let me be clear about what matters. Several weeks ago, I opened a door expecting to receive a dinner delivery. Instead, I met two boys, 6 years old, working as couriers to help their sick mother. That moment changed my life. He paused, letting the room settle. I didn't plan to become involved. I didn't intend to get attached, but I did. And what followed wasn't a scandal. It was human. I chose to help them, not as a CEO or a philanthropist, but as a man who saw something that couldn't be unseen. I don't regret that. In fact, it's the most meaningful decision I've made in years. A hush fell over the room. No one moved. I understand the concerns. I understand the optics. But I will not apologize for doing the right thing. If that costs me professionally, so be it. Because there's a family that now has warmth and food and hope where there once was none. That is the kind of return I'm willing to stand for. He ended the speech without flourish. He didn't wait for applause. He left the stage with the same quiet resolve he'd walked in with. And surprisingly, the backlash wasn't as severe as he'd expected. Some shareholders grumbled, but others, especially the younger generation, praised his honesty. Social media, once skeptical, shifted in tone. Hashtags emerged supporting his decision. Donations to his foundation spiked. People began to see not a scandal, but a story. Not a fall, but a choice. That evening, back at Marie's apartment, the boys greeted him with their usual enthusiasm. Lucas had made a card that read, "Best Pancake Dad," and Jamie showed him a drawing of a house with 4 people inside. For the first time, Andrew was one of them. Marie handed him a mug of tea and asked gently, "How did it go?" Andrew took a sip and met her gaze. "I didn't lose anything today," he said. "I just made room for what matters." And as the boys' laughter echoed down the hallway, and Marie leaned into the worn armrest beside him, Andrew felt the weight on his shoulders shift. The world might still question him, but the people in this room never would. That was more than enough. Spring began to stretch gently over the city, softening the sharp edges of winter that had settled in every sidewalk crack and window pane. At Marie's apartment, the change in season was subtle but deeply felt. The boys began spending more time near the open windows, chasing the sunlight with paper airplanes. Marie had more color in her cheeks now, her voice steadier, her movements no longer strained by constant pain. The medication regimen, the nutrition, and the stability were working. But Andrew knew it was temporary, a fragile sort of better that hung on a thread. The truth, however, gently wrapped, still loomed. Marie needed a kidney transplant, and without it, this moment of peace would not last. Andrew had not yet spoken to her directly about it. Every time he tried to form the words, something inside him froze. He told himself it was respect that she needed to be the one to initiate such a vulnerable conversation. But the truth was simpler and more selfish. He didn't want to break the fragile sense of normalcy they had created. He didn't want her to start looking at him as a potential savior. That wasn't what this was supposed to be. It was about presence, not rescue. Still, the thought stayed with him, and eventually it became too loud to ignore. One evening, after dinner, when the boys had fallen asleep with books splayed across their chests, Andrew stood in the kitchen drying dishes as Marie wiped down the counters. The room was filled with the kind of quiet that only appears in places where trust lives. No urgency, no performance, just two people moving through a shared space, comfortably aware of each other. "I saw your doctor again last week," he said without turning around. Marie's hand paused on the countertop, then resumed its rhythm slowly. "She told me," she replied. "She said the same thing I already knew." Andrew nodded. "She said, you're eligible to be put on the transplant list." Marie leaned against the counter, arms crossed over her chest, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It's a long list," she said. "Could be years." "It could," Andrew agreed. "But it doesn't have to be." She looked up at him then, eyes narrowing slightly. "What are you saying?" "I got tested," he said simply. The silence between them expanded. "You did what?" "Your blood type came up in the report," he continued, still calm. "I ran my own tests quietly. No one else knows. Turns out I'm a match." Marie stared at him, her face a mix of disbelief, confusion, and something closer to fear than gratitude. "Andrew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't just donate a kidney like it's a check or a favor. That's not something you do to prove a point." "I'm not trying to prove anything," he replied gently. "I'm trying to keep you alive." She shook her head, stepping away slightly. "You don't owe me this. I didn't ask for this." "I know you didn't," he said. "But I'm offering it because I want to, because I can. And because the boys need their mother, not someday. Now." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly, as if she didn't want him to see. She turned her back, gripping the edge of the sink. "I've spent the last 2 years preparing myself to leave them," she said quietly. "And now I don't know how to let myself hope again. It's terrifying." Andrew stepped behind her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then let me hold some of that fear," he said. "You don't have to do it alone anymore." She turned to face him. And in that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't romantic. Not exactly. It was deeper than that. It was a meeting of souls, two people who had each spent too long in the dark, now choosing in slow, careful steps to walk toward the light together. They spent the next few days talking, sometimes for hours. Marie asked all the questions she had once been too proud to voice about the surgery, about risk, about what came after. Andrew answered every one of them honestly. There was no pressure, no expectation, just clarity. And when she finally said yes, it wasn't with fanfare. It was with a single nod late at night, her voice steady. "I want to live," she said. "I want to be here for them and for myself." The hospital staff moved quickly once the decision was made. The transplant was scheduled for the following month. Everything was arranged with meticulous care, private recovery rooms, psychological evaluations, specialists brought in from other states. Andrew insisted on covering it all. And this time, Marie didn't argue. She had already given him something priceless, her trust. When Andrew told the boys about the surgery, he did it gently, sitting with them on the floor while they played. Janie leaned against his arm and Lucas asked if it would hurt. Andrew explained that he would be fine, that their mom would be fine too, and that sometimes when someone you care about needs help, you do the hard thing because love makes it worth it. Lucas thought for a moment, then said, "That's what heroes do." Andrew smiled. "Maybe, but real heroes don't do it for the credit." Marie watched the moment from the doorway, her arms crossed, her heart full. She knew that life after surgery would not be easy, that healing would take time, that fear might return. But she also knew this, for the first time in years, the future was no longer a shadow. It was a doorway, one they had walked toward together. And now, finally, they would step through it side by side. The morning of the surgery arrived quietly with skies the color of wet stone and a hush in the air that seemed to match the gravity of what was ahead. Andrew stood in front of the hospital's large windows, wearing a standard issue gown that felt foreign on his skin, his breath slow but steady as he watched the city begin to stir. Just a few floors away, Marie was being prepped for her own procedure. Neither of them had slept much the night before. They had spent the final hours talking in whispers, not about fear or pain, but about the small things. How Lucas had learned to whistle last week. How Jamie still slept with his hand curled under his chin. How the boys had started leaving little drawings under Andrew's car windshield wiper as a kind of secret game. The hospital room had been filled with a strange mix of nerves and tenderness. Marie had thanked him again, though he had told her to stop. Gratitude made him uncomfortable in this context. He didn't want to be treated like someone who had stepped in to save the day. He wasn't a savior. He was a man who had seen a door open once literally, then metaphorically, and had chosen to walk through it instead of looking away. He'd done that once in his life already after his family died. And he'd spent years paying the price for that silence. He wouldn't make that mistake again. The nurses came in one by one. Their hands practiced, their movements gentle. They marked charts, checked vitals, offered soft encouragement that felt oddly rehearsed but well-intentioned. Andrew listened carefully to the final instructions. The procedure was expected to take several hours with recovery beginning immediately after. There were risks, as there always were, but he didn't dwell on them. He trusted the doctors. He trusted the decision. Most importantly, he trusted Marie. Meanwhile, Marie sat in her own pre-op room, the boys allowed to visit for only a few minutes before being taken home by Lydia, the nanny Andrew had hired long ago and who had since become more like family. Lucas had cried silently as he held his mother's hand. Jamie had been quiet, visibly trying to be brave, like a small soldier. Marie had pulled them both into her arms and whispered promises, that she would come back stronger, that she would walk them to school again soon, that they would all have pancakes together on Saturday like they used to. She kissed their foreheads and didn't let them see the tears that filled her eyes as they left. When the anesthesia was administered, both Andrew and Marie slipped into unconsciousness with the same final thought. This is not the end of something. It's the beginning. The hours that followed were a blur of surgical precision, clinical focus, and carefully measured steps, 2 operating rooms, 2 teams, dozens of hands moving in harmony to orchestrate something both deeply human and scientifically extraordinary. The transplant went as planned. No complications, no delays. When Andrew was moved into recovery, he drifted in and out of awareness, the sterile light above him flickering in time with his shallow breaths. He felt pain, but it was distant, dulled by medication and the certainty that it had been worth it. Marie woke up later in the day, disoriented, but alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. There was a strange lightness in her chest, a quiet stillness that felt almost unfamiliar. She could feel the change. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, spiritually. The weight of survival had lifted. She had stepped out of the shadow of dying. She was at last living again. The boys were told the good news that evening. Lucas burst into tears. Jamie asked if they could visit. The doctor said, not yet, but soon. Lydia took them home, tucked them in, and stayed up late folding drawings they'd made for their mother and Andrew, pictures of hearts, kidneys shaped like smiling potatoes, stick figures holding hands. In the days that followed, recovery began in earnest. Andrew was quiet, his body slower than usual, but his mind as sharp as ever. He refused special treatment, asked for updates on Marie before himself, and insisted on walking the hall with assistance as soon as he was cleared. Marie recovered in her own way, emotionally raw, physically tender, but filled with a new kind of strength. Every day she could sit up longer, breathe easier, think clearer. Every day felt like a small miracle. They spoke often, not about the surgery, but about what came next. What to do with the time they had now. Time neither of them had dared to plan for just weeks before. Marie expressed a desire to go back to school part-time, to study social work or community organizing. Andrew said he wanted to build something permanent for families like hers, something beyond a donation or a seasonal grant, something rooted, something real. The hospital released them within days of each other. Andrew returned to his penthouse to rest, though it now felt more like a place to sleep than a home. Marie returned to her apartment where the boys greeted her with arms around her waist and cheeks pressed against her ribs. They hovered, fussed, and refused to let her lift a single thing. It was awkward and funny and beautiful. 2 weeks later, Andrew showed up at her door without warning. A bag of groceries in one hand, a folder in the other. The groceries were for dinner. The folder was plans for a new building, something modest, community-based, offering childcare, tutoring, job placement, and health screenings. A place where people didn't have to hit rock bottom before someone helped them. "I want you to help design it," he said. Marie opened the folder slowly, her hands still bandaged. Her eyes scanned the plans. "What will it be called?" Andrew hesitated only a moment before answering. "The Brooks Center." She looked up startled. He just smiled. "It started with you." "With them. I want the name to mean something." She nodded, tears rising again, but this time she didn't hide them. They ate dinner that night at the same rickety table, but everything felt different. Not because of money or plans or gratitude, but because they had passed through fire together. And on the other side, they found not just survival, but something resembling peace. Something resembling love, even if neither of them was ready to name it yet. Summer arrived with the quiet certainty of something earned. Warm wind passed through open windows, and the days grew long with light that stretched into the evening like a promise. Life, once fragile and uncertain in Marie's small apartment, had begun to settle into something steady, something real. The scent of pancakes in the morning, the boys' laughter echoing down the hallway, the thud of their sneakers as they chased each other from room to room. All of it felt like music that had always been meant to play but had taken years to find its rhythm. Marie, still recovering but stronger every day, had color in her cheeks again and an ease in her step that hadn't been there for so long she almost didn't recognize it. Andrew visited often, though visit didn't feel like the right word anymore. He no longer knocked when he arrived. He just walked in, usually with groceries or something small he thought they'd like. A new puzzle for Jamie, a baseball glove for Lucas, books for Marie. His presence was no longer met with wide-eyed excitement or surprise. It was expected, comfortable, woven into their days like sunlight through the curtains. He belonged there now, even if none of them had quite said it aloud. One morning, Andrew arrived with news. He'd been waiting for the right time, the right mood. The boys were at school. Marie was curled on the couch with a notebook in her lap, and the air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and vanilla. He sat beside her and handed her a thick envelope with the words, "The Brooks Center," stamped in bold at the top. "It's happening," he said quietly. Marie opened it, flipping through blueprints, permits, and the official approval from the city. The center was real now. Not just an idea born in hospital rooms and quiet promises, but an approved, funded project with a launch date and a future. Her name was on the letterhead. Her title, Community Director. She looked up at him, stunned. "You put me in charge." He smiled. "You've already been in charge. This just makes it official." Marie's fingers brushed the edge of the paper. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just build it the way you would have needed it." That night, they sat on the fire escape, watching the sky turn orange and violet, their legs stretched out, shoulders nearly touching. The boys were asleep inside, a fan humming softly in their room. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Marie turned to him. "You could have walked away. You know," she said, "the first night you saw them at your door. You didn't have to come back." Andrew stared out at the skyline, the lights of the city blinking like distant stars. "I think I was the one who got delivered that night," he said. "Not the food." Marie smiled at that, but it wasn't just amusement. It was understanding. They had been walking toward this moment for months, slowly, carefully, like two people afraid to disturb something sacred. But now it felt simple. The opening of the Brooks Center became a neighborhood event. There was no press, no celebrity donors or red ribbons, just families, volunteers, and dozens of kids who had never had a place like that before. The boys wore matching shirts that read Hope Crew and gave tours to guests with the confidence of seasoned guides. Marie stood at the entrance with a clipboard, her eyes bright, her hands steady. Andrew stayed mostly in the background, watching with quiet pride as everything unfolded. Later that evening, after the last balloon had popped and the final chairs were stacked, the four of them walked through the empty halls of the center they had imagined into reality. Jamie skipped ahead, dragging his hand along the fresh-painted walls. Lucas tugged on Andrew's sleeve and said, "It's better than the drawings." Marie leaned against the doorway of the main room, arms crossed, and said softly, "This place will outlive us." Andrew nodded. "That's the point." They went out for ice cream afterward, even though it was late. The boys insisted on sprinkles, and Marie got pistachio because the shop was out of mint. Andrew ordered whatever Jamie pointed to, even though it turned out to be bubblegum flavor, which he pretended to enjoy while they all laughed. When they got back home, the boys went straight to bed, too tired to argue about brushing their teeth. Marie lingered in the kitchen, rinsing dishes that didn't really need rinsing. Her back to Andrew. He stood behind her, hands in his pockets, watching her with the kind of affection that asked for nothing in return. She turned around slowly and leaned against the counter. "Do you ever think about what this is?" she asked. He nodded. "All the time." "And do you know?" "I think it's the kind of family you don't expect," he said. "But once it's in your life, you can't imagine living without it." Marie didn't speak for a moment. Then she stepped forward and laid her head against his shoulder. He closed his eyes, resting his chin gently on her hair. No declarations, no need to define it, just the quiet truth of two lives that had found each other, not through perfection, but through persistence. Outside the city pulsed on, unaware. But inside that small apartment, everything felt exactly as it should be. Not perfect. Not easy, but full, real, home. The ending of this story is quiet, but powerful, and that's exactly why it works. It doesn't rely on dramatic twists or exaggerated gestures. Instead, it shows how healing happens not in a single moment, but slowly through small choices made with love, courage, and consistency. Andrew's transformation isn't about becoming a hero. It's about becoming human again. Marie's strength isn't in being saved, but in choosing to keep standing, to trust, and to rebuild. The boys aren't symbols. They're real, full of hope, laughter, and the need for safety. What makes this conclusion resonate is that it reflects a truth many overlook. That family doesn't always begin with blood or legal papers, but with showing up and continuing to show up. It's a story about second chances for everyone and the idea that even the most broken lives can be rewritten not by miracles, but by the quiet, stubborn decision to love. Tune in next time on Millionaire in Love for more heartwarming tales.